Roundtable on developing regional policy measures in the field of DNS abuse on Tuesday, 6 July 2021. In the interest of time, we will not do a roll call today, but all attendees' names will be noted on the agenda page after today's meeting. A kind reminder to speak clearly and slowly to allow for accurate interpretation. And please state your name each and every time you speak, not only for transcription purposes, but also for interpreters to identify you on other language channels. Thank you so much. And now I will hand the call over to Sébastien Bachelet, Chair of EURALO. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Devon. Thank you very much for everybody to come to this monthly roundtable by EURALO. The idea is really to open a discussion on specific topic who can be useful not just for Europe, but for the part of the world, taking into account the view of the end user. And I am very, very happy to have today three very distinguished speakers. Joanna Kulesa, who is a member of at-large advisory committee by EURALO, but who have a lot of other capacity, knowledge, and she will explain to you the project she's pushing, and it is the first part of this project, and I'm very happy to have her here. Elizabeth Betsudi, who will talk about what Internet and Jurisdiction Project are doing in this field, and this project, Internet and Jurisdiction, which is not anymore really a project, is already something very useful, and for all the stakeholders participating, it's very good. And Stena Grotterot will talk to us about his new fun topic with a reputation block list, and I am sure that he will give us a very interesting input on that. And then we will be able to have a Q&A session. Don't hesitate to put some question in the chat if you wish, adding question at the end, at the beginning and at the end. And with that, I will. No, I need to say that at the end we will have a summary, and it's not the easiest task, and it's why we ask Lucien Castex from AFNIC to help us with this summary in 5 minutes of what will be discussed during this 1.5 hours. Thank you, Lucien. Now I give the floor to Joanna, and then the other speaker will take the floor after her. Thank you, Joanna, please.
Thank you, Sébastien. Thank you for starting us off and for leading this discussion. I did put together a few slides, and yes, do blame me for anything going wrong with this session. It was my idea to give us this specific topic for today. I do hope, however, that the angle of looking at DNS abuse meets your interest, and that you will provide us with feedback on some of the questions we want to pose today. As Sébastien kindly noted, if we could go to the next slide, this roundtable, this meeting today, kicks off an EURALO own initiative that targets DNS abuse and seeks to ensure a better understanding of what European end users expect from an ICANN policy that deals with DNS abuse. Now, DNS abuse has been a hot topic for the at-large since at least a couple of years. We've tried to approach this from different angles, and I'm very happy today to be joined by co-panelists who have gone to great lengths to better understand and quantify what DNS abuse is. Now, this EURALO program that I proposed, unfortunately, it was supported by Sébastien and the at-large leadership, is focused on a specific angle of looking at DNS abuse that deals with human rights perspectives, regulation that has been recently introduced in Europe or that we're looking to introduce. There is a lot going on right now in the European sphere when it comes to draft regulation, proposed regulation, regulation being implemented. The ICANN.org team has been wonderful in keeping an eye on all the progress in Brussels and elsewhere. But what this project seeks to address is the end user understanding of DNS abuse and what is expected, especially in the European region, because there is so much going on in that context. You have a brief description of the project here. We are trying to address DNS abuse, DNS itself, and this European concern with disinformation. I will link to this as we progress. In this brief presentation, I just want to pinpoint some of the legislative advancements that have been introduced in Europe recently. I would love to hear your feedback on how strongly supported this perspective is. And I will try to highlight how these processes impact the DNS and why we might want to think about them in the context of DNS abuse. If we could go to the next slide, I will try to kick us off with a definition of DNS abuse, something that the at-large has discussed in much detail. We have held a joint session with the contracted parties, with the GAC, looking at a shared understanding between the advisory committees. This thus far has been the leading document. So whenever we try to understand what DNS abuse is, we seem to go back to this framework. I'm happy to have Elizabeth with us here today. I know that the Internet and Jurisdiction Project has their own take on DNS abuse. I know that Steiner's presentation will add metrics or more of a technical angle to the debate around DNS abuse. But from a policy, internal policy angle here within the at-large, we seem to be going back to this little document. You could say it's the contracted parties' take on DNS abuse. And we have had this conversation with the contracted parties. They do emphasize that this definition that they've worked on is not binding in itself, but I would like to use it again today as a point of departure. If you could go to the next slide, you will see the very document that speaks about DNS abuse, what the contracted parties understand as DNS abuse, and what measures they are willing to take to address it. Now, of particular interest is, as already noted, the definition, or to be more specific, the categories of DNS abuse. Activities which will result in contracted parties taking action. Let's look at these. These are on the next slide. I've taken excerpts from the documents. And those of you who have not had the opportunity to listen to those multiple discussions we've had, do feel free to go through that document. There are a few categories of malicious activities that are perceived within the DNS abuse framework as justifying action from registries and registrars. You can see these categories here on the slide. Again, there seems to be consensus around the lacking need of a definition. We agree it's metrics, we agree it's categories, and we seem as a community to agree we don't really need a definition. Okay, let that be as it may. However, when we do look at these categories, here in Europe, they look very familiar. And we did hold a dedicated session to look at these DNS abuse categories through the lens of cybercrime. Some of these indeed would be legal categories in numerous European states, including those who have adopted the Budapest Convention from the Council of Europe on Cybercrime. And effectively, these categories are legal categories in individual European states, and they have been reflected in an international legally binding treaty. I will go back to the Budapest Convention as we progress, but let me just start us off with looking at these technical categories from this legal perspective. If we could move to the next slide, this DNS abuse definition is concerning particularly because it quite explicitly touches upon content. There are a few categories of content here that have been recognized by the contracted parties as so dangerous, so abusive, that they will give ground to action from the contracted parties, likely disabling the services from anyone proposing offering that content online. Now you can see these categories here. Child sexual abusive material seems non-contested. It is again a crime in all jurisdictions, I would say. There is little debate around the justification for this. You would also see here the specific and credible incitement to violence. Now, this is interesting because this kind of an activity bridges into freedom of expression. Who should be the judge of whether a specific phrasing, a specific cartoon, a specific video meets that criteria? Now, Steiner will talk to us today about reputation block lists, and I think partially the answer will be right there. But I would like to use this content-related category, quite broad, as you can see. Some would argue quite arbitrary, as a point of departure for our analysis or discussion here today. Now, clearly, this reach into content going beyond the picket fence that the ICANN community has agreed upon has not gone unnoticed. You will see on the following slide that here in Europe, European Commission is looking into DNS abuse. If we could go to the following slide, I just want to flag an advancement that let me note the at large is observing quite closely. The European Commission has commissioned a study on DNS abuse. It links law and technology. We are in touch with those who have been commissioned to conduct the study, and we are excited to welcome them to give us a recap once the study is completed. So this unique, one could say, technical category of DNS abuse has strong, explicit links to legal categories well present within the European realm. We're going to start off with the European Commission, and the advancements you can see there directly linked to what we described as DNS abuse. If we could move to the next slide, this is just a study targeting DNS abuse. But as already noted, the Commission has been very active in regulating, they call them platforms. There's this new package, Digital Services Act package, that consists of two acts. One of these is the Digital Services Act. The other one deals with media and targets large platforms right when it comes to content. And this document has been commented upon also by ICANN.org. I have linked the comments and the recap from Elena Plexida to our agenda. Again, I encourage you to look into this. Now, this clearly is one of the reasons we look at DNS abuse from a regional perspective. The Digital Services Act focuses around, as the name has it, digital services, which includes those related to the domain name system. It is an update of the e-commerce directive that originally dealt with intermediary liability. We have always thought about intermediary liability as a content-related issue. This remains the case. However, the Digital Services Act covers also non-hosting intermediaries. And yes, non-hosting intermediaries could just as well mean our friends in the registries and registrars community. If they are included into this package, Similarly to what we've experienced with the GDPR, Europe will try again to regulate the broad DNS landscape through a regional legal document. Now, these are acts. It will likely become a directive. States will decide on what it is that they expect intermediaries to be held liable for. Now, this interestingly brings me back to this category of content that I initially flagged. You could see 4 elements in that DNS abuse definition that the contracted parties have provided us with. Here in Europe, we are particularly concerned with disinformation. A few years back, there was this huge discussion in Germany on fake news law, where intermediaries would be punished for hosting fake news. It was in reality very closely linked to an old law Germany had on hate speech, but effectively Germany would expect intermediaries to ban hate speech. This is a shortcut taking us directly from the debate on DNS abuse into content and European understanding of intermediary liability. Now, if this is a topic you would like to have more information on, I'm happy to answer questions, but instead of me trying to reiterate what we have covered previously, let me ask Michelle to go to the next slide. Icon has commented on this package in much detail. This is a recap. You will find also links to our agenda. On the next slide, if we could move on, is a brief paper that summarizes why we as the end user community should care. And Elena has been wonderful in emphasizing why this document might cover as a category of intermediary liability. For example, cases of disinformation, hate speech, fake news, something we feel so eagerly about here in Europe, and something that has been contested elsewhere. I do not mean to name jurisdictions here, but looking at the headlines, it is quite easy to observe. We, as the universal community, do not look at freedom of expression in the same way. It very much differs among jurisdictions. It seems we have clearly crossed the Rubicon of content. It also seems that the European Commission, the European Union, encouraged by the success of GDPR, is again trying to impact the transnational flow of data through a European legal act. Now, I might be wrong. This might be hopefully stopped if that's what we want. But the point of my intervention here is exactly to take temperature of the room. Are we concerned, or is this something we entrust to the governments to cover? Now, I'm just going to speed up a little bit. Let's move to the next slide. If the end user community within EURALO around this round table is not so concerned, let me note that the right community is. They have provided feedback. They have, how should I say, exercised certain impact onto European parliamentarians, resulting in that document being tweaked. The question I want to put on this round table today is whether that is a path that the end user community also wishes to follow. RIPE NCC has expressed their concern with the way that the Digital Services Act has been drafted, and they are keeping a close eye on things progressing. Let me just move on to the next slide. Clearly, the DSA, although I've devoted most attention to it, is not the only legal act we should keep at the back of our heads when we think DNS abuse. We, as the at-large, have commented on the NIS2 Directive. The following slide, if we could move swiftly, reiterates the reasons for concern. There is an update to the directive on network and information security, dealing with critical infrastructures. When we think about critical infrastructures, we naturally think about the DNS, and rightfully so. So does the European Commission. And it wants to make sure that the DNS remains safe For it to remain safe, the open questions round accompanying NIS2 included questions about what we used to call the who is. There is no who is anymore to speak of, but the idea is right there. There is one more legislative advancement, if we could move to the following slide, that is on the cards right now. I believe it has not provoked as much attention among the end user community, but if I was to pinpoint the concerns we might have or the documents that we might want to be concerned about, I would say that this proposal for a directive on the resilience of critical entities would need to be added into that scope. Last but not least, let me highlight again a topic we've covered thoroughly during one of our ICANN meetings. If we could move to the next slide, I flagged the Council of Europe Budapest Convention, and it has been updated and it is being amended with an additional protocol. As Alexander Zieger was kind enough to explain during a plenary that we held at ICANN 71, I still have that lovely policy forum virtual background with me, the additional protocol will likely reintroduce what we thought of as whois. So even though the ICANN community is facing certain challenges with the EPGP and EPGP phase 2, governments or international organizations are not taking as much time building consensus and are moving forward with an additional protocol that will likely redo what the GDPR has impacted severely within the ICANN environment. If we could move to the next slide, I have a brief summary of where the second protocol will be taking us. If you give the slide a look, you will see details of how similar that would be to the whois that we once knew. And now for the final slide, a summary or a set of questions, since this is a roundtable and we're looking for feedback. I'm curious if we as an end user community are concerned about these advancements. Maybe we are pleased because they will feed the European understanding of individual security into the global discourse, as we have done with the GDPR, introducing a largely European understanding of data privacy to the world. It seems that this path will be followed with the DSA, with the DMA, with the Digital Services Act package, with NIS2, etc., etc. Is there a policy avenue we as the end user community wish to explore? If so, what would it be? How could we make our voice heard? If there is something we feel should be added to this discussion. If we as a European end user community feel that this is the right way to go, how do we support these efforts in the universal ICANN end user and multi-stakeholder environment? I am very much looking forward to Elizabeth and Steiner presenting their perspectives or their work, their efforts related to DNS abuse. So I'm just going to leave these questions here as my finals. I think there's a thank you slide coming up as the very last one. And I'm going to stop here. Thank you for letting me take the time to ask these questions. And I give the floor back to Sebastian. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Well done and just on time. And I will give the floor immediately to our next speaker, Elizabeth Besudi. Please take the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. And to EURALO, thank you very much for having me. Once again, my name is Elizabeth Besudi, and I'm the director of the Domains and Jurisdiction program at the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network. I'm here today, of course, to talk about this very important issue and also to give you a little bit of information about a toolkit that was produced by our group and released earlier this year. You see here, it's called the DNS Level Action to Address Abuses Toolkit. If we go to the next slide. Just before we dive into the toolkit, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information for those who might not be familiar about our organization. The Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network was founded in 2012 by Bertrand de la Chapelle and his business partner, Paul Fellinger, and really as a venue that could allow states to collaboratively address, as you see here, the transnational policy challenges of the digital 21st century. As we know, we have a relatively or virtually borderless internet, which is bounded by lots and lots of different rules and regulations from various jurisdictions that don't always agree and harmonize with one another. So our aim is to help ensure policy coherence and legal interoperability among people, processes, actors, initiatives. Just a word about interoperability. When we talk about that, a lot of times we're asked, well, you know, what does that really mean? Are you trying to harmonize, you know, the laws of every country and every state within a country, et cetera? No, what we hope, what we mean by legal interoperability is really quite the opposite. It's, you know, with a nod to the fact that there are competing jurisdictions, competing business models, different viewpoints, perspective, goals for different stakeholders, and yet to look across that very varied landscape and say, how can we come together? What can we agree on? And how can we produce solutions that maybe aren't one size fits all, but that can work among different processes, actors, countries, et cetera. So if we go to the next slide, you see here we have within the network 3 policy programs, as you can see: data and jurisdiction, content and jurisdiction, domains and jurisdiction. Again, the goal is to allow stakeholders to develop voluntary policy standards. Each group has within it what we call a contact group. That's 30 to 40 or so subject matter experts that are supported internally by the Secretariat for the domains program. That would be me and my colleagues, but also coordinated by volunteer coordinators, one for each program. For the domains program, the volunteer coordinator is Brian Symbolic, who many of you will know as the general counsel of PIR. If we go to the next slide. So what does the Domains and Jurisdiction program do at the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network? Well, what it really seeks to do is to help preserve the DNS as a neutral, as it is, a neutral technical layer of the internet. And that really begs the question that you see here. And it's all about thresholds. So when is it appropriate to act at the DNS level to address abuses? And as Joanna mentioned, I think there's broad consensus within the contracted parties and indeed within the CCTLD world that what is sometimes referred to as technical abuse, and you saw that definition that was displayed from the abuse framework, which is phishing, farming, malware, botnets, and spam when it's used as a delivery mechanism for other forms of abuse, is generally considered, as I said, I think there's broad consensus to meet the definition of technical abuse. One thing I did want to say as regards the abuse framework, not every contracted party is a signatory to that framework. The framework was introduced in 2019. It was championed by PIR and TUCAUS at the time. They have, I think there were 11 original signatories and they're well over 50, I believe now. However, not every contracted party has signed on to the DNS, to the abuse framework. And that really does have to do in significant part with what Joanna mentioned, which is there's some discomfort with the reach into content. For example, I think many operators who are not based in the United States are not as comfortable, for example, recognizing perhaps compulsion to act to address illegal opioids online. That's something that's very, very, it's a very significant problem in the US, but operators in other parts of the world don't view it as an imperative for action, for example. But again, we're talking about thresholds. So when is it appropriate to act at the DNS level for technical abuse? When the domain itself it's reliably determined that the domain is being used to engage in significant abusive conduct, again, technical abuse, phishing, farming, malware, botnets, spam as a delivery mechanism. For content, there's much less agreement. As Joanna pointed out, I think the one area that many operators agree on is what we call C-spam, child sexual abuse imagery. And short of that, there are some sort of squishy definitions. As Joanna said, at least the abuse framework includes a reference to a responsibility to act when there's specific and credible incitement to violence. And what that means to one operator may be very different to another. So indeed, these are very important issues, and they become more important, I guess maybe more urgent under the lens of pending legislation such as the DSA and the proposed changes to the NIS2. If we can go to the next slide. This slide is something that was produced and is contained in the toolkit, was produced by the contact group last year. As you see, it's called Effects of Action at the DNS Level. And in a way, it made sense that this was the very first document that the group produced, because what this does is really take a look at the very limited set of technical implements, tools, if you will, within a DNS operator's quiver. So when I'm talking about DNS operators, I mean registries and registrars. And in a nutshell, I'll explain the various commands here. But the real import of this slide is to say that DNS operators do not have the ability to sort of in a very surgical way remove bits of offending content. It's very much the DNS action at the DNS level is very much an on or off tool, all or nothing. And so when a DNS operator does take action to disable a domain, it has a global impact. In other words, the DNS operator cannot disable content in one country, not the other. It can't take down specific content on maybe a sub-URL or page of a particular website. What it can do is to remove that domain name from the top-level domain, the relevant top-level domain zone file, which makes it unreachable via the DNS. Very quickly, I'll just go through, you see on the top, we have the lock command. When this command is applied, it prevents changes by the registrant to the registry, the configuration details for the domain. So when a lock is applied, the registrant can no longer go in and make changes to what we used to call the whois, and also cannot redirect the server. In other words, lock really just does what you would think it does. It locks it. Everything is held in place. However, if all that is done is that the lock command is applied, the domain will continue to resolve. And I should say, when we move on to hold, the second command that you see on the top right of your screen, this is the command really with the most teeth, if you will, in addressing abuse at the DNS level. When the operator applies the hold command, it's sometimes called suspending the domain. The domain is removed basically from the TLD, the top level domain zone file. But very importantly, it can still be reached using the IP address. Now, most people don't access domain names using the IP address, and many people most of us don't memorize IP addresses. So I just want to point out it's very, very effective for addressing DNS abuse, but not foolproof, because again, it doesn't touch the numbers side, if you will, of the equation. It's still available via the IP. The content that domain points to is still available via the IP address. On the bottom left, you see redirect. This is a command that operators see a lot, mainly in conjunction with court orders, and very often when law enforcement takes action, they will ask for a domain to be redirected either to maybe a splash page that advises users that the domain, for example, may have been seized or was implicated in some sort of criminal action. This helps law enforcement advise the public and identify victims of crime. Again, it's an available action. It's typically not one that operators would do without a court order. The transfer command is the command that would transfer a domain from one registrar to another registrar. You would see this also perhaps in the context of a law enforcement, some sort of law enforcement action, if law enforcement does indeed seize the domain. You might also see it in sort of civil IP disputes where there's been some sort of trademark or copyright infringement, and the domain is ordered to be transferred to the rightful owner of that intellectual property. And finally, we see on the bottom delete, and you see that we didn't include a graphic for this command, and that's by design, because the command really is not very effective in remediating abuse, whether it's content or technical abuse related in the DNS. The delete command literally will purge the domain. However, most TLDs and all TLDs that are open will have what's called a drop zone. And so when the domain is deleted, it will literally go into what we call the drop zone, and it becomes available again on a first come, first served basis to be re-registered. And that includes by the person or entity that was using the domain to commit abuse in the first place. So typically you would not see delete used as at all. And when it is used, it's not a very effective remedy for addressing DNS abuse. If we go to the next slide. So the toolkit, again, having the group really put their heads together on what the thresholds were, and sort of fleshing out an understanding of how things work and how do they present that to users, to notifiers, to law enforcement, to legislatures. That was really the starting point. And then building upon that outcome that we just saw, the effects of action document, the 2020-2021 Domains and Jurisdiction Contact Group produced a number of outcomes, 7 or 8, which are included in the toolkit, aimed primarily at technical abuse, again, because it's the abuse that is, I think, lends itself most easily to remediation, and to remediation in a proportionate way via the DNS, the domain name system. So again, we hope the toolkit will help DNS operators in designing their abuse-related activities, notifiers, and I would say that absolutely includes users in detecting and reporting problematic activity within the DNS, and then finally law enforcement and legislatures and helping understand what are the procedures, what are the possibilities, and what are the limitations for dealing with different types of abuse using the DNS system. If we go to the next slide. The toolkit is, this is just a little bit about how the toolkit is structured. Sort of the 4 pillars, the process for the work was really based on 4 pillars that you see here listed in the middle column: identification, evaluation, choice of action, and recourse. And then those different considerations helped inform the outcomes that you see listed on the column all the way to your right. So when we talk about identification, again, we're talking about thresholds that help produce the document that we've reviewed, the effects of action document, but it also helped produce something called typology of notifiers document that really, just as it suggests, sort of surveys, chronicles the various types of notifiers that make notifications to DNS operators. It also helped produce something that we call a DNS level action to address technical abuse due diligence guide for notifiers. Very, very important document, one that I think this group might particularly be interested in, because it really takes the notifier, the end user, whoever is making the notification, through sort of a structured framework for how, when, and where do we make, do I report technical abuse or content-related abuse if I feel that it's happening? Who do I go to? What are the considerations? Again, under the category of identification, and in the same vein, the group produced something called minimum components for technical abuse notices. So once abuse has been identified, you've sort of done your due diligence, you're going to make notification in the first instance almost always to the registrar, because they have the relationship with the registrant and can usually most effectively work with the registrant to either remediate abuse in the case where perhaps the registrant really isn't the wrongdoer, maybe their domain has been compromised, or in the case where they reach out to the registrant, the operator, the registrar can let the registrant know, hey, this domain is being used to phish. And if there's no action or response by the registrant, then the registrar can take appropriate action. Minimum notice components for technical abuse notices, I think, would also be very interesting. Again, it's what are those components that the operator has to have just to get out of the block? And then what are those that are nice to have? And I should pause and say here that the aim of these documents is not to raise barriers for notification action at the DNS level. It's really the opposite. It's really to promote effective and efficient identification, evaluation, notification, and action on technical abuse. Under the evaluation pillar, again, thresholds, as we talked about, and using, again, that understanding of threshold for action, the group produced a DNS operator's decision-making guide to address technical abuse. I think also probably of interest here, sort of will take you through, what do operators look at as they're evaluating technical abuse or content abuse-based complaints. Choice of action, again, we're talking about, if we go back to the effects of action document, okay, there are 5 commands. We know 4 of them are regularly used. We don't use delete, but it's a case of malware, for example. Which action is most effective in remediating, a given type of abuse case? Again, I think very interesting, and I think very clear. I think the group did a really good job of sort of providing enough detail, but also making it understandable for people who aren't necessarily, well-versed in the ins and outs of addressing abuse at the registry or registrar level. And then finally, recourse. And this was a consideration that helped inform, and here we're talking about recourse for registrants, transparency, due process. And with these considerations in mind, the group helped produce what we call a procedural workflow, which really is just a visual document that sort of walks the reader through the sort of flow. What happens? Okay, I've made my notification. Now what happens? And it sort of goes through the process, the different points of contact at the registrar level with the notifier, and then with the possibility of escalation to the registry in the event that the abuse is evaluated, confirmed, but for whatever reason, the registrar doesn't act to remediate the abuse. So again, these are tools I think that are very useful. I think they're clear. I would encourage you, I posted a link earlier. You can download the toolkit on our website at internetandjurisdiction.net. And if any of you have any questions, comments, please do get in touch with me. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And I know we're going to have some Q&A at the end of our session here. And so I'll just quickly go to the next and last slide for me, which is just to give you an idea of what the contact group is doing this year. The Domains and Jurisdiction Toolkit is intended to be sort of an iterative document, so it's not finished. We have more work to do. We hope that we'll update and add to the toolkit as we can. The group this year is looking at doing a botnets procedural workflow with a special emphasis on botnets that include or that are propagated by what we call DGA, domain generating algorithms. The group is also working on a notices, traceability, and statistics collection. They intend to do some work on that this year. That's about transparency, first and foremost. And the group has already started to discuss and begin to frame out some work on trusted notifiers. And I think, just a word on trusted notifiers. Many operators don't use them, some do. I think you see it most often in the context of, or the sort of the trusted notifier programs that get the most attention are those that are focused on content. So for example, when you talk about CSAM, child sexual abuse imagery, many operators work with IWF, the Internet Watch Foundation. These are, very specific sort of bilateral arrangements typically between operators and the given notifier. But what our group is trying to do is not to advocate one way or the other for their use, but to say, what are the considerations and what does a good, what does a good framing look like? So these are some of the issues that we're working on. And again, I hope to be able to maybe come back at a later date and tell you about some updates to the toolkit. But I think I'm out of time, so I will yield. And thank you once again for having me.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Sébastien Bachelet speaking, and I will give the floor immediately to Stena Kotorot. And please take the floor.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks for being able to attending this conference. We can take the next slide. Thank you. So why? Sorry, there's a phone here. Why was I invited here? Well, I do know something about this. I've been a very long experienced within the internet. I've been experienced as ISP registrar and registry operator since the mid-90s. And my day job is handling abuse notices for IQ global clients. And we also consult registry operators in defining or creating or altering their abuse policy. And adding to that, being particularly involved and paying attention to the DNS abuse discussion within ICANN and at large. Next slide, please. So what is a reputation block list? There was, to my surprise, maybe, kind of a definition made by ICANN on the acronym side. It is kind of important to know that there are commercial and there are non-commercial reputation block list providers. And what they do, they try to collect suspicious behavior in some sort of category, different categories, and put that into a database very often, and make it possible for anyone that either pay the fees or go on a website to kind of check and investigate what is going on. Is there any suspicious behavior going on in your namespace? And for the DAR project, which is kind of an acronym that you might have heard about, that's the ICANN project for investigating suspicious behavior. And they also use this reputation block list. This is then it's mainly focused on domain names, but there are block lists also for IP addresses, URL, and there are also lists that covers content. So there are various different types of block lists, and you have to take that into consideration when you are using these kind of block lists. Could we take the next slide, please? This is also some information I've grabbed from the DAR project, and this is an overview of some reputation block list providers. You see kind of known name as Spanhouse, Serval, Anti-Phishing Working Group, Fish Tank, etc. And these, what you should pay attention to here is that you see the list and the providers, they have more than one category. Sorry, there was I'm in a cabin together with my family, and there are these providers have multiple categories often in the lists. So you have to be aware of this and take into action what you're trying to find out. We can take the next slide. So this is all about abuse mitigation. What should we do? And the way I see this is that the block list is as kind of a toolbox, at least for the contracted parties, that they can subscribe to, or they can use third parties services like IQ Global's abuse monitoring systems to identify suspicious behaviors going on in their namespace. What is also important is that the contracted parties, the registry operators, they do have this registry specification 11.3b, registry agreement spec 11.3b, which is an acronym that you most likely will come up to. They have to do something. It's not detailed, and one of the criticisms in the discussion at the ICANN community is not there should have been more detail and how they should act on this. And the registrars do have some regulations in the 2013 registrar accreditation agreements. But when it comes to the CCTLDs, and I'm talking particularly of the European CCTLDs, they are not necessarily, they have this kind of obligation. They're neither in the domain name policy or in the terms and condition. So this is a little bit tricky. Some parties do have some actions to take care of, and some doesn't really, they're not obliged to do anything. But first of all, it's also the reputation block list is a system to identify security trees. And what I think is a very, very important element in abuse mitigation is the communication. There has to be a communication between the registry, the registrar, the registrant, hosting providers, ISPs, and so on. These communications are extremely important because when somebody do something like putting a domain name on client host, server hold, and so on, the end user has to know something about this. Why is this happening? And also the pure fact that a domain name may be seen as a suspicious, but it has not been registered by bad guys. It's just been hacked, and maybe sometimes the registrant doesn't know about it, and then it suddenly see that there's a warning on the website. This needs communication. Let's take the next slide. I have done some statistics here, and we have a free tool that you can subscribe to at abusestats.com. And what I've done is that I've taken, I think, the majority of the European CCTLDs and looked whether they are listed in a set of reputation block lists. And we see that there are more than 84,000 abuse reports being in the block list. And these are from 25,000 unique domains. That means that a domain name can be reported by different sources, different reputation block list providers. And I will support you in the chat, the link to this report. You can take it more in detail. So let's go to the next slide. This is kind of interesting. What we see here is that, well, the most of us will think that, oh, spam will be the most common abusive behavior. But within the European CCTLDs that I've put together in this report, phishing is more than 71% of the reports are connected to phishing. You also see that scam, which is less than 1%. This is more like a picture of, because the reputation block list we have is more or less tailored into the technical abuse stuff and not into so much into the content oriented lists and so on. So I will post this link to this report in the chat. I will let it stay live to the end of this week, and then I will delete it. But you can make your own reports and so on. So what I'm a little bit here is that the essence here is that the reputation block list is a tool. It's one of the things that Elizabeth talked about, evidence. It's maybe seen as an evidence, at least for the technical stuff. When it comes to other than technical abuse, I think you have to really tailor and the sources that you find to use to identify CSAM, illegal pharmacy, violence, hate speech, and so on. And I'm hoping that these providers can be more effective and more easy for registries and registrars to look into, and it hopefully not too costly to either. So because today it is a cost element connected to this. Let's take the next slide. That's it. If there is any questions, I'm happy to answer that. I guess there will be, and there's my email address, so you can contact me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steinar, and thank you for the three speakers. Now I will like to open the floor for question. We have already 2 questions into the chat, and I will start by the first one. I guess it's for Liz. It's how does Internet and jurisdiction differ from the DNS Abuse Institute?
Thanks very much. Well, we are 2 different organizations, although we are we sort of are very close in the way that we work together, and I think the work of I&J sort of laid sort of a predicate foundation for the DNS Abuse Institute, in that the work that we were doing, it just was very apparent that there was a real need for more study, for more focused efforts. And I will say the DNS Abuse Institute is focused exclusively on technical abuse, not content. And they are looking to develop, like we do, best practices, interoperable solutions. One thing that we're working together with the Institute on is we're seeking to develop what's called a abuse reporting, a portal for abuse reporting, so that folks who, for example, they know that they're getting spammed by a particular domain, but they have no idea who the registrar is, or who the registry is, or where do I go, what do I do? And so we're hoping to co-develop with them an abuse reporting portal where folks can just go and, without having to know, oh, this is a GoDaddy domain, or, you know, this is a Two Cows domain, or it's Gandhi, or it's managed by VeriSign, or what have you, they can go to the portal, make a report, and it will get to the right organization. Again, with the aim of making notification reporting and then reciprocal action easier and more efficient.
Thank you, Liz. Sebastian Bachelet speaking, and sorry I didn't say that it was a question from Glenn McKnight. Thank you, Glenn, and thank you, Glenn, for your help with all the transformation of the presentation to ebook. Great job. We have now a question by Shiva Subramania Muntesami. It's a long question. I will try to read it to you. If the DNS abuse mitigation processes require or recommend that the registrar, registry, or hosting providers make use of RBL, I guess it's abuse. It's what Steinhardt was talking to us about. What is a RBL? You will tell us again. Why are these list and services on subscription models? It is understandable that many of these RBLs are developed and maintained by private party, but if the DNS consider it important that abuse mitigation measures require one or more of all of these RBLs, why not integrate it as an integrated part of the DNS abuse mitigation process by some arrangement? Steinhardt, do you have ideas or answer to this question? Thank you.
I would try, and this is Steinar Grøtter for the record. First of all, the contracted parties, they are not obliged to use any of the RBLs. The wording in the contract doesn't refer to our reputation block lists whatsoever. They only refers to that you need to monitor your namespace for certain categories of suspicious behavior. So the way I see it is that the reputation block list providers is one of the things that you can put into your toolbox. There are, you may find others than the reputation block list. You have local certs that are doing some investigation, and you may get data from them, etc. But if you are a registry or a registrar, you need some sort of a formatted data that can be imported into your provisioning and your notification models and so on. Why are these subscriptions models? I don't know, honestly. The reputation block list providers, the majority of these has been there for a very, very long time, but it was more used by ISPs and core network providers and so on to identify security threats in a different way that it is today. So with the Spec 11 3B and so on, there was maybe a switch of business model for the reputation block list providers into tailoring more into that area. But I think there's an ongoing process. Why is it costly? Well, I don't know the answer to that one either. There are many of these do have subscriptions fees that when you are asking for kind of a big volume, but if you want to look at one domain name as an example, you may put this into a web form on the website and you get the immediate response to that one. So whether it should be free or not, well, it is hard work to collect this and structure this in a way that it's been can be readable for the community. So I'm not sure about that. Hopefully this answered some of your questions, but it's that was a long one. Thank you.
Thank you, Stenart. Thank you for your answer. Barry, you want to ask a question? It's maybe better if you talk, not me. If I can give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Patty speaking. I have an incubating business, and over the years, many times, small businesses I had was hacked, or the domain name was hijacked. So I learned as soon as we informed registrars, they just locked down our business. I had in one point 10 businesses locked down by, I'm not going to say the name of the registrar. But that discouraged us in future to inform registrar when there was a hacking or there was some kind of activity. So to what extent, who really supports these small businesses that don't have resources to fight back? They often are caught in this situation, and registrar is the only authority that, decides to lock down their business. How this system works and where is the rights observed?
Thank you, Barry, for your question. Who is willing to answer? Maybe Liz, you want to take the first? Go ahead,
Sure.
please.
Sure, Elizabeth Busudi for the record. Well, first, I'm sorry to hear that. Every registrar has an abuse contact, but more importantly,
Yeah, we can't hear you very well. I don't know why, but
can you hear me now?
a little bit better, but I'm not sure that.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I hear static on the line too, but I don't think it's coming from me. But anyway, yeah, thanks. First of all, I'm sorry to hear that. I will say that, each registrar does and should have an interest in working with their client in the case of a hijacked domain or in a case where the domain is hacked, to help remediate whatever's going on and get the domain back into the good hands and good control of the registrant. It's really going to depend on the circumstances of every case. If there's phishing going on, for example, and it can't be remediated, you may very well have the registrar end up having to lock the domain, but hopefully that's sort of an action that's taken at the last resort, because again, we would call what you're describing a case of the domain being compromised. In other words, someone or something has gotten a hold of it and has been able to use the website that it's pointing to, or maybe the domain itself for some nefarious activity. But really the default should be to work with the registrant to try and clean up whatever's going on before just automatically locking.
Thank you. Stena, do you want to add something on that question?
Oh, well, it is, this is Stana Grötter for the record. It is a little bit tricky. It's how do I phrase that? There will be let me phrase this this way, but trying to be polite also is that if a domain name is being hijacked, if a domain name is being identified for suspicious behavior, it's not necessarily the domain name itself, it's the services that is connected to the domain name. And we have, there are different ways to solve this. There's a lot of security things that you may or should do and so on. But there is one challenge here. We very often have what we call the nuclear option. We have to either lock it down for a period of time, or kind of put it into a sync call where you can identify more into that. But that's a very costly thing, and I'm not sure all registrars doing that kind of services. So it is very tricky, and I can't give you any good advice. And keep all your services up to date. Take all the new patches into whatever you have of services and so on, and try to monitor it as good as possible. Sorry, but I don't have any better answer to that.
Thank you, Stenat. You know, we are here to exchange, and if there is no good and bad answer, it's interesting to hear from you. I will take this opportunity to ask Joanna a question if she's willing to answer. We get very good presentation on tools, one about the toolkit for DNS level action to address abuse, and the other one about reputation block list. After those presentation, how do you see that it could be useful for end users? Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you, Sebastian. I must admit, I knew these presentations would be wonderful, so thank you very much for these. And I think they complement each other to a large extent. On one hand, we get a better understanding of the processes that are the everyday reality for the ICANN community members. On the other hand, we understand the metrics, the statistics, the processes. I appreciate Perry's question, and I also see Shiva's comments in the chat that, to my understanding, partially reflect on the questions I was trying to pose here. What I was initially talking about were the legislative measures that are aimed at keeping us individuals safe and secure. And what we have learned from both Elizabeth's and Steiner's presentations is that they are not directly relevant, that there is an entire world out there that operates, well, I'm not going to say regardless of those laws, but to some extent, not directly waiting for legislation to tell them what to do and how to do it. Are these processes sufficient? Are they transparent? Are end users aware of them? I would say that Perry's example gives me a negative answer to a large extent. We are not really sure how they work. So building capacity on these processes, to me, is an AI out of today's meeting. I also understand that, again, feeding into these Brussels discussions, as we have tried to do, for example, during the stakeholder meeting that was organized by Chris and Elena a while back, and the European Commission being very open, explaining their perspective, is useful, but it might not be the only avenue we wish to take. And I like the European focus here, because Europe, the European Commission, the Council of Europe are doing so much addressing these issues, where from the presentations, but again, I would love to hear from the floor as well, it seems as if those are not center stage to the community. Maybe they should be when we look at back at GDPR, or maybe we can just leave them as they are because we as a community do it differently. I think that's partially an answer to your question, Sebastian. But if there's anyone willing to share their thoughts on how we best address the issue of keeping end users safe, I would appreciate any feedback. And I do see we have quite a good attendance, especially for an evening in early July. So I'm curious if there is anyone who wants to share their comments. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Joanna. Please feel free to take the floor if you wish. I just want to add one point. It's not just linked with DNS abuse, but it's also linked with the work that Stena is doing with relationship between a registrant and a registrar, and how we can move from one registrant to another one. I just want to be short, but I wanted to move my domain name but it was to a reseller. I have no news anymore. Therefore, it was very complicated to go to the registrar. And when I have linked with the registrar, they told me, okay, we agree, but now we keep it for 60 days. And in the middle of this 60 day, I am supposed to renew the domain names. And I can't talk to them because I have no number for as a customer. I am not yet a customer. And therefore, I imagine if I have a real trouble with my domain name, it's not the case. You will have the possibility to buy my domain name in a few days because I decide to give up. But if I have a real trouble, I don't know who I need to ask for. And I consider me as quite well-informed end user. Therefore, if it's, I will say, sorry for the word normal end user, how they can have this information, what they can do, and it's one of the problems we have as an end user. Liz, you wanted to say something? I see you nodding.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth Bisutti, for the record again. Yeah, what I was going to say is I think that Perry's example, and to a certain extent your example, but I'll speak to Perry's first. Really sort of highlights the tension that exists between wanting to protect end users and wanting to, again, sort of preserve the neutrality, right, of the DNS as a technical layer. When I look at the DSA proposal, and of course we could do a whole session on that, but if you look, for example, at recital 26, there's sort of an acknowledgement that when you have a problem with content, the principle is that you should try to remediate the person or entity that should take the first crack at remediating the problem is the entity closest to the content. What does that mean from an internet perspective? It probably means first you would go to the site operator. If that's you, you've got a problem, you've been hacked, you've been hijacked, you go to your hosting provider, right? From the hosting provider, if you don't get satisfaction, you would go to the registrar. From the registrar, no satisfaction, you might go to the registry. But every time you move up that chain, the sort of the scope of the action that can be taken gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so instead of, if you start only with the registrar, instead of being able to perhaps just figure out why someone's embedded, a fish on a sub URL of your website, or, why certain content has appeared on your website that you didn't put there. Once it gets to the registrar level, they don't have the ability to just go in and fix them. They can lock it, they cannot lock it, they can suspend it, they cannot suspend it, but they can't get at that content. And so I think it is very important, and I think as an industry, we do have to do a better job of educating and doing outreach and education so that end users, so that everyone that uses the internet, first of all, will have, there's be more transparency and ultimately more trust and better solutions. So that's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Sebastian, can I add something?
Yes, Barry, go ahead. Sorry, I was muted, but yes, go ahead, and then I will give the floor to Stenat and to Joanna, because we are at the time and we need to move for the summary. But Barry, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I mentioned that we had in 1.10 businesses locked down by a registrar. And at that time, we even contacted lawyers, and basically as an end user, I had no right. It was very difficult, very costly procedure. So I think the responsibility of both hosting companies and registrars needs to be defined. At this stage, it seems none has any responsibility, and they are in the position of basically dictating to end users their requirements and their way of dealing with issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Pari. Okay, now it's time for me to give you very short time for a summary, for a last word. Stena, if you wish.
Yeah, thank you. This is Steinar for the record again. I'm thinking that reputation block list may be seen as one of several tools that you can use to identify suspicious behavior within your namespace, but you have to kind of identify what sort of block list that you want to investigate, and you also have to take a look at it by itself. You can't trust it 110%. There are false positives, and you have to do your own investigation in addition to that. I would love to have some sort of a system that end users could easily report when they find something that is suspicious, whatsoever in what category. They don't have to know that, but put that into some sort of form, and then it's going up the chain of responsibility. But I honestly think that's a very, very long way. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, you want to take very few seconds to last few words, please?
Yes, thanks. Once again, Elizabeth Bisutti for the record. And just to that last point, that abuse reporting interface that I mentioned earlier, that PIR is and the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network are collaborating on, could be the very thing that you just mentioned. I'll just close by saying, again, I think that there is, this is an issue that isn't going away. As big as the internet is, there are, as many abuses as you can imagine. And I think we all need to do our part to combat abuses. But I think to do that, responsible actors need to come together, collaborate, cooperate, understand each other's strengths, understand each other's limitations, and work toward interoperable solutions. So thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Joanna, please.
Thank you. Yes, I think what is left for me is just to agree and try and wrap it up. I do agree that this is a multifaceted challenge, and I'm really glad that we managed to look at it from different angles today. I am devoted to building capacity around DNS abuse, as I do believe it is an ambiguous notion that does come down to very basic, simple terms, like the case that you and Pari had shared. To me, this is a useful exercise, giving us an opportunity to understand what DNS abuse can mean and try and address it better. But looking at the long run, as Elizabeth indicated, this is a topic that will remain on our agenda. I know that there are efforts trying to measure and better understand what DNS abuse is and what the expectations of end users are. I view this roundtable as a first step towards having that discussion, and I'm very much looking forward to us proceeding in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and really thank you for building this roundtable. I just wanted to take a few seconds before giving the floor to Lucia with a comment from Glenn McKnight, who says education of end user is a serious challenge, as today's audience is limited of insider, and the average Joe and Jane is very far down the feeding. Yes, and we need to start somewhere. I definitely agree, Glenn. We need to find more Joe and Jane, but I consider that we have few of them here, not enough. Largely not enough, and it's what we will have to do, trying to involve the member of our at-large structure to go into that direction. It's it's an open target, but I hope that together we will be able to do it. Now I will give the floor to Lucien Castex from AFNIC for the summary. Lucien, floor is yours.
Thank you, Sébastien, for giving me the floor. I'll do the summary in French, but I wanted to highlight just a few seconds the importance of interpretation, just to make the debate inclusive and open to everyone. Switching to French, it's a bit more complicated this time since I have, a phone just next to me. But well, going back to French. Thank you.
It's speaking in French, but not in English. I don't know why, but I hope it will be.
The microphone was off?
Now it seems to be
the
working.
microphone was not working, so now it is working. However, the interpreter apologizes. Just a second. Okay, I'll start again. Many apologies for this technical problem. So I will start again, and I will just say that the exchange, the presentation by Sébastien, shows how important the exchange is between the different stakeholders. Gathering all of us is success. The ability to talk about a key topic, such as DNS abuse, is very important. I will try to be brief. We talked about many things tonight. The first speaker, Joanna Kulesa from ELAC, started to give us an overall vision of what DNS abuse is. And she showed the importance of the different legislations that are being discussed at the level of the European Union. She talked about the approach that end users should have about abuse and what we can do with the work that the European Union is doing and the different texts that are being proposed and debated currently. The first idea is to have a shared understanding of DNS abuse. So what does that mean? First of all, a definition. And the first point has to do with the different categories that we have recognized as a basis for common discussion. This common discussion is based on phishing, spam, and so forth. So the definition. And then there's a certain number of texts that are being discussed at the level of the European Union. First of all, the legislation on digital services, the DSA, the Budapest Convention of the Council of Europe, and a certain number of other texts that are being debated at the level of the European Union. The DMA, Digital Markets Act, and other legislations having to do with data and other technical discussions at the level of the NIS2 Directive. These this European work puts the question of the definition and the unclear borders with freedom of expression. There is different approaches. There is the French approach, there is the American approach, and of course, at the level of the European Union, the different member states don't have the same approach. A certain number of stakeholders within the community have expressed their reservations. And then the community of users should figure out what the path forward is. Should they support these laws, or should we have a different approach?
The second speaker was Elizabeth Bisciutti of Internet Jurisdiction Policy Network. She introduced the network, which was set up to enable discussion at the level of public policy discussions beyond borders. And the idea is to produce concrete solutions based on the diversity of the different stakeholders. Elizabeth presented 3 different programs: content and a domain name, based on the development of voluntary standard with the help of topical experts and the creation of different communication groups. She stressed that the DNS should be a neutral technical layer of the internet. So there are different ways to fight against abuse, and how should we proceed? Sometimes the abuse is technical. That is the case with malware or phishing, where there is a sort of a form of consensus between the different actors. In other cases, things are more complex to evaluate because we are moving towards content. So hate speech or abuse of children. The next speaker, the speaker stressed the impact of an action of different stakeholders, which means that we shouldn't just suppress content in a surgical manner, so to speak. We need to intervene in a global manner, not just based on content. There are a certain number of ways to do this. So for example, we could use IP addresses. And in the end, she introduced the toolkit that was developed by the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network. And she ended. Apparently, it is difficult to hear me. So I'll go a little bit quicker. The next speaker, Steinar Grotrad, talked to us about reputation block lists, which enable us to identify a certain number of abuse. He introduced different points, the registry agreement specification, 11.3b, as well as a certain number of tools that are being used to that effect. There are more than 84,000 reports in the blacklist or reporting instances, and those lists need to be considered with great care. We also, we moved to a question and answer session, and we talked about the DNS Abuse Institute work, which is a PIR initiative, collaborating with the Internet Jurisdiction Policy Network, with the objective to set up a portal for abuse notification. A certain number of points were noted, and I will mention 3 only. First of all, there is a difficulty for certain small structures, for SMEs, for example, in case of abuse, because when their site is blocked, their activity is stopped. We also mentioned the need for better understanding by users of the technical realities underlining abuse. And then the difficulty to have access to information for the final users. That would be the last point. And to conclude, I would like to mention the fact that simply being able to debate about DNS abuse is a success in and of itself. And the idea is to use the multi-stakeholder context to debate and reach a concrete solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sébastien Bachelet speaking. First of all, sorry for We are a little bit late. I will try in the last 2 minutes to do what I wanted to do in 5 minutes without talking too fast. First of all, thank you for Joanna, Elizabeth, and Steinhardt, who give us a very interesting presentation on the various topics around DNS abuse. And I feel it's a great start for the project that Joanna is leading within EURALO and more generally in at large. Hope to see the next stage. Thank you for Lucien for the summary, and thank you for using the tool of interpretation. I would like to invite you the 8th of July, where we will have a readout session, totally reorganized compared with the one we have done to the last 2 meetings. It will be a single one with 4 languages, English, Français, Espanol, Ruski, and we will be able to listen to the speakers with interpretation during the first hours, and then we will split into 4 breakout rooms, 1 in each language, to be able to discuss with our most close own language the issue. And the second thing I wanted to say is that monthly roundtable will take holidays. The next time we will have one will be hopefully in September. And I am dreaming to organize such a well-organized monthly roundtable about the other project we are leading at EURALO around diversity in the leadership teams in ICANN. And I am sure that you will be interested to that specific topic. Thank you very much once again. Have good holidays. Take care of you. Really, it's not yet totally finished. And I know what I am talking about here. Be vaccinated if you can. It will ease everyone else, and I hope that we will be able to travel again very soon. Take care. The meeting is closed with my great thanks.